Welcome to the debate. I'm glad to finally get a chance to debate you, Mr. Vineyard. You can't hear me? That's not good. Let's see if I can hear you.
Okay. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes. Okay, great. So we're good. Let me read my opening here. I do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear the true faith and allegiance of the same, and that I will obey the orders of the President of the United States and the orders of the officers appointed over me, according to the regulations of the Uniform Military Code of Justice. So help me God. This is the oath you take as an enlisted recruit in the U.S. Armed Forces. If a man or woman is willing to take this oath and abide by its declarations, they meet the standards of physical and mental faculties needed to serve, they should be allowed to serve. The Army Chief of Staff General Miley recently reminded us of this when he said, "The United States Army is open to all Americans who meet the standard, regardless of who they are. Embedded within our Constitution is that very principle, that all Americans are free and equal. And we, as the Army, are sworn to uphold and defend this very principle. And we are sworn even to die for that principle. So if we in uniform are willing to die for that principle, then we in uniform should be willing to live by that principle." Marine General Joe Dunford, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, agreed when testifying before Congress on this issue. "I believe any individual who merits the physical and mental requirements, that is worldwide deployable and currently serving, should be afforded the opportunity to serve. Thousands of transgendered individuals are already serving in the armed forces. Many of them have made multiple tours of Afghanistan and Iraq. Like every other soldier, they did their duty and upheld their oath. And for that, they deserve our honor and respect. This is the moral principle under which I'm arguing today. There's also a pragmatic argument to be made, which is recruitment. The U.S. military is facing considerable challenges in recruiting today. To turn away Americans with able bodies and minds is foolish and wasteful. We should not compromise quality, but we must judge individuals on their individual merit and for the needs of service. Transgender service members have proven that they can serve with distinction. Furthermore, the policy of exclusion paints the military in a light that is unattractive to the youth of this era, further damaging recruitment efforts. Alienating the military from the current generation of American youth is not a good policy. Narrowing the pool of recruits that are ready, willing, and able to defend their country is ultimately bad for our national defense.
Okay, you provide an awful lot, but I want to ask quick, rapid fire questions for you, so be prepared to respond quickly. I'll give you a couple of questions and then respond. How do you know someone's trans? If a trans is not on hormone therapy and has no mutilation surgeries, and they don't tell you that they are trans, how would you know?
You would only know if they told you.
If someone believed that they were an interstellar alien inhabiting a human body, should they be believed? Why not? Is it a mental condition? Should they be allowed to serve in the military if they want to enlist? How about somebody who thinks they're a trans species? They're an animal in a human body. Should they be allowed to enlist and serve?
It's a good question. I would generally say that they are probably suffering from some kind of delusion of some sort, since those things are not known in human history, as far as I know. So I guess that's my answer.
Okay, next, what is the purpose of the military? Does anyone have a right to serve? When the military hires people, are the recruiters obligated to allow anyone to serve, or is the goal to get the best possible people for the military mission? And again, what's the mission? What's the purpose of the military?
The purpose of the military is to defend the sovereignty of the United States of America, and recruiters should choose people based on the qualities needed for the service in the military. There is no right to serve in the military. It's a privilege and an honor.
Next, should the decision to admit transgendered people be made by social justice warriors, like in the Congress, pressuring the military to accept people who might not fit, or should it be made by the military if they've had a chance to evaluate the policy change? And I would exclude perfumed princes in the military who are operating like the chairman of Joint Chiefs Staff. Several years of Obama policies of selecting people who are lapdogs and suck-ups and will give them the answer that they want to hear and not necessarily military effectiveness.
Well, I think that in the military, not with politicians. The military does serve the will of the public, but it should be focused on its mission. I think characterizing people as suck-ups and lapdogs is an ad hominem argument that doesn't discount their opinion just because you have a view that they're not real military guys. The Joint Chiefs of Staff and the other generals have served the country well, deserve honor and respect just like anybody else in the armed forces.
That's a nice point. However, are you aware of the Marine response to the idea of women in combat and how that went?
I don't know. You can tell me about it.
Okay. The Marines ran some actual war gaming, and they took some combat groups, and they put basically like 7 to 10% female in the combat group, because that's about what they have in the Marines across the board. And then they pitted them against all male combat units, because up until there was a big pressure by Congress, liberals, social justice warriors, and Obama wanting to allow women to go into combat, with Marine females were excluded from combat. During those combat exercises, the groups with females suffered horribly. They were very ineffective. This information was passed to the JCS as a saying, we do not want women to be in combat roles because it degrades the mission. The JCS basically told the Marine Corps to shut up. What do you think about that?
Well, you know, I'd have to look at the study. You say that they performed terribly, suffered terribly, which are subjective arguments. If there's some kind of objective standard under which to measure casualty rates or specific instances of not following orders or something, then that would be one thing. But to just say a blanket statement that they performed terribly, I think is pretty ridiculous. We also don't know the standards of training that these women had received, what kind of situations they were compared to the other people who were posed up against, or what the situations for the war game were. So I don't know. I'd like to hear some specifics of that report as to in what way they performed badly in order to feel that that was justified. It's, you know, true that men and women are different, but not every woman is the same and not every man is the same. I believe in classic liberal values of individualism, and that each person should be judged not upon what group they belong to, what their gender is, or any other characteristic, but the quality of their character and the value of their actions.
Well, the thing you take a look at is that, first of all, I gave you an example of the fact that the Marines decided that they would evaluate, and I believe that, you know, per your previous comment, you said that the military should decide. Well, the Marine military did evaluate, and their recommendation was no women in combat groups. Now you're wanting to challenge that. Well, I thought you, a minute ago, you said you were willing to respect the fact that the military should do it. Okay. Also, you're talking about anyone should be able to serve, and you're looking at being able to have individuals. Well, I know a very capable young lady, brilliant, smart, athletic, and she was denied the opportunity to fly F-16 jets because she's too short and too light for the ejection seat. Should the military be obligated to retool to allow the too tall or the too short to fly, and not just the people that fit within a certain range?
No, absolutely not. You know, the military has physical and psychological requirements for a reason, and they should follow those. I don't think, you know, I wouldn't qualify for the military. I'm too big. I can't sit in a fighter jet for sure. I don't even qualify for the Army because I'm like this huge guy. And they shouldn't have to change that for me. It would be dumb. But so long as, you know, the contention here is whether somebody meets the physical and mental requirements in order to join the military, then they should be able to join, and you shouldn't arbitrarily dismiss them because they have a transgender status. Now, you talk about me rejecting the military's decisions. That's not the case at all. I'm challenging your characterization of this study. I don't know how accurate it is. You know, I think you have sort of a biased opinion on this subject. So I don't entirely trust that how you characterize it is necessarily the content of that report. That's something that happens from time to time, so that's why I would be interested in more details. Now, I can tell you that the military has studied the transgender situation. I've got an estimate here, or an interview here for PBS, and read it in my last debate. They said, lastly, very quickly, I understand that you looked at all the experiences of 18 countries who have transgenders in the military. And the general answer is yes. Is replied, did any of those nations have any problems that they felt needed to get transgender service members out of their service? And the answer is, so we didn't find any readiness or cohesion implications in that study. Furthermore, as I said, when Obama changed the policy, he had the military study this. They didn't determine that there would be significant impacts to military readiness as a result of making these policies. And a number of transgendered people have served admirably with the military. For instance, Christopher Beck served for 20 years in the Navy. She was in SEAL Team 1-5, eventually Elite Team 6. She deployed over 13 times in 2 decades, including stints in Bosnia, Iraq, and Afghanistan. She received the Bronze Star Award for Valor, the Purple Heart for wounds suffered in combat. If you think this is the kind of person that should not be in the military, I think you're totally wrong. Serve. If they meet the qualifications, they should be allowed to serve because we need them.
Glad you mentioned that, SEAL, because he served 20 years. He won a lot of awards. He served admirably. And then after he got out, he became a she. Okay. Now, one of the things you mentioned before, you're talking about the idea of worldwide deployable. Well, first thing you have to realize is that somebody who is undergoing transgender surgery, transitioning, and is taking hormones is in a special medical category that makes them not worldwide deployable. You say that there's lots of transgendered that have served, and you keep throwing the number of 11,000. Well, the RAND study that I think you've referenced basically said that they've estimated that there are between 1,300 and 6,600 transgendered serve on active duty, 800 to 4,000 in reserves, with mid-range figure of 2,400 in active duty and 1,500 in reserve. That's a real number. And guess what? All of those people serving are serving as the sex that they are and not the transgendered status that they believe in. You do not have guys who think that they're women and being granted the privileges of women and showering with women. They are hiding their own identities, their perceived identity, and they are serving as men and women. They are not serving as transgendered. And I have no problems with somebody who is a man serving as a man, but I have a big objection with saying we need to modify the entire military structure so that a man who says, I think I want to be a woman and I've got male plumbing and I want to be able to shower with the women and I want to be able to pass the women's PT test and I wanted to be given all these benefits, I don't agree with that.
I appreciate that you don't agree with it. The bottom line is who you shower with or what you say you are is not critical to the military mission. The military mission is defending the country. If these people can do that, if they're willing to uphold the oath of office and put their lives on the line for defending freedom and honor in America, then they should be able to do that. Who gives a crap what kind of showers they have to take? Why does the military have to utterly change its military command structure? These are the same kind of arguments we've heard for years back in the day when, we can't have blacks in the military. It would creep everybody out and then they're not brave people, they're cowards. You hear all kinds of arguments whenever somebody wants to change something and include more people. There's a lot of resistance. It's weird and it's scary if you don't know much about being a transgendered person. I know transgender people. They're human beings, and they're often brave, and they can be courageous. Sometimes they can be fearful. They run the whole gamut of the human experience. There's nothing that the military has to do that's magical or strange or particularly difficult in order to allow people to serve. They're serving openly right now. They were serving in the closet before, but the bottom line is they're good soldiers, and that's what matters most.
I don't think we have enough to show how effective transgendered would serve. And when you talk about the study of 18, that's it. Only 18 countries allow transgender to serve. I'd like to see the study where they've evaluated countries that have considered, tried, and rejected. I would like to take a look at why we have, for years, denied transgendered. Because up until 2012, the Diagnostics Service Manual basically said that transgenderism was a mental condition. What's changed about that, except that you've got people in the psychiatric department deciding that it's no longer politically correct, that we've got to now change it. You got to face it, the fact that there are two sexes. Every cell in a male body, except for gametes, there's an X and Y chromosome. And every cell in a female body, except for gametes, there's two X chromosomes. Okay? There's very, 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 very rare conditions where you might have hermaphrodism, where you might have XXX or XXY, XYY, but those are so rare that we won't even discuss them. When you come across a blood or tissue sample from a wounded or killed soldier in the field, the analysis of the DNA would show you that the sample came from a male or female person. Transgendered is in the mind, it's not in the body, it's not in the plumbing. Okay, so when you start taking a look and saying that we are now going to allow mental conditions, mental perception, i.e. somebody who says, I'm an alien, but I'm inhabiting a human body, I want to serve. I'm a trans species, I want to serve. Somebody who says, I think I'm a fire truck, I want to serve. What do? Enlist him, paint him red, put him out, put wheels on him? That's a mental condition.
The fallacy of the argument from the absurd. Paint a ridiculous condition of somebody being a fire truck and say, oh, it's crazy talk. We can't do that. But, you know, these are real people. And the idea of transgendered personalities and ideals has been around for a long time. Native Americans have not just two sexes, but multiple sexes that include people who identify as transgendered. We have history and anecdotal evidence going way back in human history that people have had these kinds of feelings, had these inner natures for a long time. Many other cultures outside of the Western cultural tradition have specific words, terms, and social places for people like this, as do older ancient Western traditions. You know, there's a puritanical, thought in American culture that has persisted today that finds it difficult to understand and to deal with, and that's fine. Sex is not just about your biology. It's also a social role, and that's what these people in their mind feel, that they were not born into the correct sex. They don't identify with that sex. That's their prerogative. That's their decision. It ultimately doesn't affect whether they're good soldiers or not, which is what's really important today. You can talk about biology. You can say that you think, you know, a particular view is weird. You mentioned that it used to be a mental condition. There's a mental condition in the DSM-4 called gender dysphoria, which is extreme distress and difficulty because of transgender status. Now, if it's making your life miserable and a wreck and you're depressed and anxious all the time and can't deal with life, then yeah, you have gender dysphoria, and that's a difficult condition, and you can be excluded from the military based on that condition. But some transgender people, many transgender people, don't have that problem. They know who they are, they know what the problem is, they work through life in order to solve that problem, and usually once they've made the transition, they're much happier and much more stable people. And they're perfectly capable of serving in the military both before a transition and after a transition. Before, you mentioned some problems about medical reasons. That's covered under the military as well. The current code limits you after a period after you've had your change to be able to join the military. You have to wait at least 18 months before you've stabilized. They don't allow you into the military if you have an extreme regimen of hormones that's going to make it difficult for you to serve. Only people who kind of come out in the military and they can prove that that was something that happened while they were in service can get those things covered. You can get special dispensation, just like people who develop diabetes while they're in the military. That makes some accommodations for them, even though they're not normally allowed in the first place. The bottom line on this debate is whether or not transgendered people, by the very fact that there's transgender, should or shouldn't serve. And the way we should judge that is whether or not they can or cannot be good soldiers. And you haven't given us any reason whatsoever why they cannot be good soldiers.
Okay, a couple of items. First of all, you mentioned diabetes and you keep referring to it. If somebody comes up with a diabetic condition, that's disqualifying. Okay, they can't enlist if they have diabetes. They can't serve if they have diabetes. There is a slight exception. For example, and I'm going to quote from the Army Medical Manual: diabetes mellitus, unless hemoglobin A1C can be maintained at less than 7% using only lifestyle modifications, diet and exercise. That's from the Army Manual 40-501 Standards of Medical Fitness. If somebody is required to be taking special drugs, special medication. They're not worldwide deployable. Okay, somebody who has bariatric surgery in order to get rid of body fat and lose weight, from that point on, because they've had bariatric surgery, they're on a special diet. They have special needs and monitoring. Bariatric surgery is an immediate disqualification, and if you did it while you were on it serving in the military, you would be discharged.
If somebody who's transgendered takes surgery or gets on a course of medication, requires a course of medication that makes them ineligible to be deployed, then you could just charge them the same way you would do with people with diabetes that develop it under the same criteria. We're not asking for transgendered people to be treated in any way that other soldiers are not, or to bypass any rule that anyone else has to abide by. It's the same standard, and that's what matters here today. If someone is on a kind of medication that makes it impossible for them to serve, well, therefore, it's impossible for them to serve. But that is not exclusively and intrinsically because they're transgendered. Many transgender people currently serve in the military, and presumably the regimens of medication they are or are not on are not disturbing them, because under the current rules, they could be ejected on those grounds. And yet, many of them continue to serve, which is prima facie evidence that they are capable of serving their country in this way. It's pretty easy to kind of pick and choose a bunch of different little things that you think might be a problem and paint a whole group of people under that picture. Because one person is on a kind of medication that makes them ineligible to serve, then nobody who's any way related to them can't. And the military doesn't work that way. Fortunately, they're wise enough to see that there are individual situations that they can take into account, and they really want to determine whether or not you're able to perform the duties, both mentally and physically, that they ask of you. And so long as you are, I think you should be able to serve, and serve with honor. They're not asking for incredible special accommodations. They're not whining that they need their ass kissed. They're willing to do the work. They're willing to put their lives on the line. They're willing to meet the requirements that the military asks of them. And I don't see any reason why, if they're willing to do that, if they could take that oath of office and mean it and pass the tests, I don't see why they shouldn't be included.
Okay, once again, the transgendered that have served have not had surgery, because having surgery is immediately disqualifying. That's per the Navy and the Army manuals. Okay, having the surgery would be disqualifying. Being on the hormones, they would be doing it illegally under the table, because up until 2016, anybody who was taking those hormone treatments would have been thrown out. Okay, so to say that they've been serving while going through treatment and whatever hasn't happened yet. Okay, and one lieutenant general, retired, wrote, "There are arguments against the inclusion of transgender people in military service based on the view that transgender is a mental illness, and as such, transgender individuals are unfit for service. This argument follows a high incidence of depression and suicide manifest in transgender." That's at 40%. This argument follows a high incidence of depression and suicide. I'm sorry, I'm repeating that. This is especially pertinent in post-sex reassignment surgery individuals who are unsatisfied with results. In such case, severe depression is prevalent. Hormone therapy. Okay, so let's say somebody's trying to transition and they're having the hormone therapy. It can affect mood and a sense of well-being, factors that count towards inclusion of transgendered people, and its effect on service capability. Besides the well-being argument of hormone treatment, may arise due to hormone complications arising from estrogen and testosterone therapies include an increased risk of thrombolytic disease, myocardial infarction, breast cancer, fertility programs, stroke, abnormal liver functions, renal disease, endometrial cancer, and osteoporosis. Any one of these could cause significant issues to the effective military service, especially when deployed in remote areas or in field training settings. What you're doing is you're talking about a very tiny class of people. Less than 0.4% of people can identify as transgendered, and you're saying we need to overhaul everything. We need to send out and tell people in the service, hey, you may have guys that want to shower with the ladies, get used to it. You talk about we can't afford to turn people down, but that 0.4% is so small and insignificant. And yet at the same time, if you said, we're going to force everybody else, the other 99.6% to accommodate them, and we're going to drive out of the military anybody who doesn't say, oh, that's normal. Anybody who says, I don't think that's right, we're going to drive them out. You're going to have more recruiting problems because you're going to drive plenty of people out who say, I don't have to put up with that crap. I just will not enlist. So you're going to hurt recruiting by this very attempt to accommodate a tiny percentage of people who arguably have a mental.
We're not going to hurt recruitment. A Quinnipiac University poll, who runs is a school that runs polls and has a polling school, released Thursday, found that 68% of American voters think that transgender people should be allowed to serve, and that includes 55% of voters in military households who support transgender service. According to the poll, there were only about 28% of voters that disagreed that transgender should serve in the military. Among the youth of America today, transgender rights is very popular. So there are more people that will respect the military for their inclusion than will be angered by the military for their inclusion. The military has always tried to keep up with the culture of American youth because that's the demographic that comes into the military service, and that's who they recruit from. So that argument isn't true. It's quite the opposite, in fact. And of course, there's the fact that they're just transgender people that make excellent soldiers and that they should be in the military if they want to serve. Now, again, you kind of bring up the mental illness problem. You say depression, suicide, higher rates. Yeah, true enough. You know what? If you suffer from depression, have a history of depression, if you've made suicide attempts, you can't join the military. If you show these problems while you're in the military, you may well get a discharge. If you have a history of ADHD or a number of attention deficit disorder problems, if you're fat, you can't join the military. Same for transgender people across the board. There's just nothing intrinsic about being transgendered that means these things will necessarily apply to you. If they have a higher rate, that means less transgender people as a percentage will get into the military, and that's just fine. The only thing that we're arguing here against is that very fact that you claim to be transgendered excludes you. And nobody is asking for a complete overhaul of the military infrastructure. They've already done the studies on what the costs will be and what measures they had to take. The lifting of the ban was implemented in July of 2016, and they had a 6-month transition period, which ended in December. And they've now implemented these plans, and there's been no great collapse or calamity or flight of military service members because, oh my God, there's a few transgendered people here that we know are openly serving. The men and women of the U.S. military are the best in the world. They are capable of serving alongside their comrades. They understand the principles that I read that Staff General Miley related, that they are there to fight for all Americans, and that all Americans have a duty to support and defend their country. And if they're able to, and if they're capable to, and if they are willing, then they should be allowed to do so, both because we need them and because honoring military service is an important part of our national pride and character.
Well, I've got a son that's involved in recruiting duty, and he doesn't feel that we have the problem with recruiting to the point that we should be scraping.
Sorry.
I don't know what happened. As I was saying, my son is a recruiter in the Army, and he doesn't think we're at the point where we need to scrape the bottom of the barrel. We would be much more effective to work with high schools and get obesity fixed and have a lot more eligible people, and effective than trying to change the entire ethos of the military to accommodate people who have a mental problem.
When you say things like scrape the bottom of the barrel, that's pretty telling. I'd love to see you go to the Navy SEAL that I mentioned earlier that spent 20 years in the military and is decorated officer, Bronze Star, Purple Heart, and tell them they're the bottom of the barrel. That's really offensive and really disrespectful, to be honest. So, basically I say stow it to that bullshit. Treat people with honor and respect that deserve honor and respect. Using terms like that is, it just shows that underlying this is not a concern about military service. It's not a concern about the armed forces. It's a personal bias. You think these people are crazy. They're mentally ill. You don't understand them. You're afraid of what they represent. You don't want to shower with them. You're going to get cooties. But none of that matters because this is about defending the country, having the courage to put your ass on the line, in the line of fire, to be with your brothers, to defend the American public, to defend the American way of life, which is about liberty and equal treatment under the law. And that's all I'm asking for today. And I can't quite press them. There we go.
Okay. Well, unlike you, I've actually put my ass on the line. I've actually served in the military, and I do respect people who are wanting to serve, and I do respect all people, and I've got no problems with transgendered in general. However, I have no problem. That SEAL guy who spent 20 years, great, wonderful. And then when he got out after serving, he decided to go through transgendered surgery. Now, he's a bit of a bully, because I remember him debating Ben Shapiro and threatening to, send him home in an ambulance because Ben Shapiro doesn't accept that sexual surgery and mutilation will take a man and make him a woman. He's still got, every cell in his body has got X and Y chromosomes, even after you mutilate the body. Okay. And as far as showering, I don't mind showering. I would not mind showering with that SEAL guy, but I wouldn't want that SEAL guy to claim that he has a right to shower with my daughter who served in the Army for 10 years. Okay. If he still had his physical plumbing there, if he's been modified, okay, he's no longer got a penis. He can go shower with the women if the women don't mind either. But I think that this whole society, what we're doing is we are gradually removing the guardrails from a society, and we are devolving down. More and more stuff is becoming more and more acceptable. You talk about all these surveys and studies and polls, and the unfortunate thing is that these surveys and studies and polls become more and more of push polls. They do not give people the facts, and we've got a lot of very ill-informed people, a lot of people who will give off-the-cuff remarks without understanding what the costs are, what the ramifications are, and so then they use this to nudge society into further and further away from traditional values. And like I said, I think you're going to see a lot of people who are mainstream who say, I don't want my son or daughter to enlist and go off and be subject to mandatory transgendered acceptance in the military. I have no problems with somebody who may feel that they're in the different body, but they wish to serve, and their serving is more important than making society conform to what they think their body is, and saying, I will serve quietly as a female because I've got female parts. And then later on, maybe I'll do something I have no problems with. But when they decide that the world's got to change to accept what they think, I've got a serious problem. Somebody like that SEAL who can serve for 20 years was able to keep his own identity suppressed, allow him to do a good job. And then he underwent the sex change. So got no problem with that.
So again, we're not talking necessarily about people, but change after change doesn't matter. If they identify as transgender, they should be allowed to serve so long as they meet the requirements. That's the beginning, the end, and the middle of my argument. And unless you can say that they can't be good soldiers, then you don't really have a case against the article today. We're scraping the paint off of these arguments here. And on the surface, there's some talk about readiness, there's some talk about mental illness, but really it comes down to what you said, cultural change. You don't like it. You want traditional values. You don't want things to change in the world. But guess what? The United States of America started with 30 guys, white guys in a room, deciding they didn't like English rule anymore. They were going to make a country by, for, and of the people. Of the people was those 30 guys at that point. Then it was landowning men. And then as time went on, we liberalized even more because we have at our heart liberal values about individual sovereignty. And they expanded the rights of votes to blacks. We had to have a war in order to do that because people like their traditional values. They like to have black people in chattel slavery. They like white people to be on top. And eventually we got rid of that, but it was a hard fight. They dragged their feet. They had Jim Crow laws. And then eventually, women came up and they said, what about us? Aren't we people too? Aren't we by, of, and for the people? And we had to say yes and include them in society. And American history has gone on like that as we realize the ideals of individualism, of liberalism, of our value that all men are created equal, and all women, be they transgender or not transgender, if they're good people who are hearts are in America and about pluralism and love for their fellow countrymen and doing good things for other people, then we've moved towards including them. And every step, Every single step. There have been people that said, oh, but our traditional values, things are changing. I can't accept this new world where black people are treated as full humans, where women, for God's sake, have the right to vote. No. The history of America is marching forward against that kind of bigotry and hatred. As traditional as it may be, it is useless and bad. Our founding fathers in the Declaration of Independence set a standard for what it means to be a human being and to have rights as a human being. And every step of America would move forward in that. And just because you have a hard time with penises and vaginas does not mean that brave men and women should not be allowed to serve in the armed forces honorably and to defend our country, as many have done bravely and effectively.
You make a compelling case, but you're basically asking that transgendered condition to be equated with being born black or being born women. Okay, the women who got the right to vote, serve in the military, they are what they are. The problem that you're dealing with as transgendered is we've already identified that 40% attempt suicide. That's a population that is at a high risk for all sorts of mental problems. And the problem that you're dealing with is a fair number of these people, especially as young kids, will grow out of it if left alone. There are plenty of cases where you've got transgendered who've gone through mutilation surgeries, who've regretted it and have gone and had the surgeries to try and correct. They've ruined their bodies because once you transgender change, you've destroyed stuff. You can try and recreate it, but it ain't going to perform correctly. And somehow you minimize the idea that women should be forced to shower with trans men who still haven't had surgery. You've acted as if that's as an equal right as a human, as a black person serving in the military. That's equal. You've decided that a mental condition is equal to a physical condition, and I find that just amazingly strange.
And that you find it strange. If you have a problem with people showering together, you have these things called shower curtains or dividers or going to a different bathroom. It's not super complicated, not really hard to figure out. Plenty of transgender people look like the sex that they're transitioning to. Some do, some don't. You can have a rule that if you pass, then you can use the right showers. These are things that are easily accommodated. Again, the bottom line of my argument, running out of time, is that if you are willing and able, if you have not ruined your body, if you have not ruined your mind, you should be able to serve in the military honorably and defend the country. That's the end of my argument.
Okay, well, I guess I would agree in many ways with what you're saying, in the fact that if you're qualified physically and mentally, you should be able to serve. However, for many decades, centuries, somebody who had male equipment and thought he was female up until 2012 was considered having a mental problem and could not serve. So, hey, we're both right. You think they should only be able to serve if they qualify mentally and physically, and I say agreed. And somebody who thinks that they've got male parts, male DNA, but somehow in their mind, they think they've been born in the wrong body, they have a mental condition, okay? And the psychiatrist agreed with that up until it became politically incorrect, and social justice warriors decided that it would be more appropriate for us to change and say that that's normal and accepted, and then we're going to have to find ways to accommodate these people. And somebody who is on hormones, somebody who's undergone mutilation, is no longer worldwide deployable. Therefore, once if they come in with already having the surgery, they're not worldwide deployable. They should not be allowed to enlist. If they come in and they're not on hormone therapy and they've not had surgery, then I have no problem with them serving based on the gender, the sex that they are when they entered in, so long as they can remain that way. And when they finish their service honorably, hopefully, then they can proceed to go ahead and attempt to change their body. But I do not believe that the military should be a social experiment. And it is a far cry. I think it's wrong to equate race with a gender dysphoria. And that is what your transgenders have. It's a gender dysphoria, and you're basically opening yourself up to Bradley Manning, who failed to do their service, and you leak lots of classified information and you create problems.
Thanks for the debate, Mr. Vineyard.